Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving into the thrilling Blackmar Diemer Gambit, focusing on the famous Halosar trap, a sharp and aggressive line where white sacrifices material early to unleash a deadly attack. Get ready to see how a bold opening can lead to a stunning checkmate in just a few moves. It starts with pawn to d4, then pawn to d5, and here comes the bold pawn sacrifice, pawn to e4. At first glance, this move may seem unsound for white, perhaps even a bit dubious. It looks like white is simply giving up a pawn for nothing, right? After all, black can easily capture it, and most players probably will. But think about this. When you're playing online, especially in blitz games, the key to winning is creating problems for your opponent. As Magnus Carlsen, the world chess champion, once said, "People crack under pressure." That's exactly why gambits are so effective. By offering a pawn early, you force your opponent to think, react, and possibly make mistakes. When you play this gambit, you gain a couple of extra tempos for development and open up several lines of attack, which can be used later to launch a strong offensive. Now, originally when this gambit was first created, a long time ago, the author of this opening, Blackmar, suggested continuing with pawn to f3. However, later analysis showed that this was not the best approach for white, because instead of accepting the gambit, black can strike back with pawn to e5, challenging white's center, possibly forcing an early queen exchange, and ultimately ruining white's attacking plans. Later on, white discovered that instead of immediately playing pawn to f3, it is actually stronger to first develop with knight to c3, attacking the pawn on e4. The most natural response for black is knight to f6, defending the pawn. Otherwise, white would simply recapture it. Now, white continues with the gambit idea by playing pawn to f3. When black captures on f3, white can naturally recapture with the knight, which is a perfectly good and solid move. However, since we are playing in true gambit style, there's an even more aggressive option, recapturing with the queen instead. By playing queen takes f3, white immediately increases the pressure and sets up more complex problems for black to solve. Another major advantage of this move is that it creates an unusual and tricky position, one that most opponents are not familiar with. This means they can't simply rely on memorized book moves or famous grandmaster games. They'll have to think for themselves right from the start. It's always a good sign when your opponent has to spend extra time thinking. The more they think, the more likely they are to make mistakes. After white plays queen to f3, another pawn is offered as a sacrifice. Naturally, most players controlling the black pieces will be tempted to capture it. However, it's important to notice that white can actually defend this pawn later. By developing the queen early, white is also preparing for longside castling queenside, in the near future. Of course, white first needs to develop bishop, but once that is done and the rook moves to d1, the pawn on d4 will be perfectly protected. Still, the most natural reaction for black is to accept the pawn sacrifice. After that, white immediately gains another tempo by playing bishop to e3, developing the bishop while simultaneously attacking black's queen. At this point, black is forced to move the queen away from the attack. There are several possible squares for retreat, but white's main plan remains the same regardless. For example, if black plays queen to b4, which looks like the most aggressive move because it pressures the pawn on b2 and eyes the rook and knight, white can simply continue with longside castling. This move not only protects the b2 pawn indirectly, but also activates the rook, bringing white's pieces into perfect harmony for a strong attack. This move fits perfectly into white's overall plan, but at first glance it might appear to be a mistake, since black has the response bishop to g4. We'll take a closer look at that move in just a moment. Before diving into those variations, it's important to understand that the position we have right now is already quite dangerous for black. And that's what makes this opening so impressive. Black hasn't made any obvious mistakes or blunders. In fact, most of their moves have been completely natural. Yet somehow the position has already turned risky for them. White's pieces are far more active and well coordinated. For example, the knight is ready to jump to b5, threatening knight takes c7 checkmate, which is a very powerful idea. The queen on b4 can also come under attack, sometimes from the rook after rook to d4, putting additional pressure on black. On top of that, white can also play queen to g3, aiming directly at the c7 pawn and increasing the threats around black's king. Overall, white is clearly ahead in development, has multiple attacking possibilities, and black must now play extremely carefully. One wrong move, and the game could end very quickly. The move that black will most likely play here, unless they are already familiar with this trap, is bishop to g4. At first glance, it seems as though white's previous move was a serious mistake, as the bishop now attacks both the white queen and the white rook. It looks like white has blundered and is about to lose material. However, white has a powerful counterattack prepared, knight to b5. With this move, white threatens a devastating checkmate with knight takes c7, and because of this immediate danger, black has no time to capture the white queen. If black ignores the threat, knight takes c7 would be a checkmate on the spot. Let's explore what happens if black tries to create an escape route for the king by playing pawn to e5. While this is certainly not the best defensive move, the resulting variation is so striking that it's worth examining. After knight takes c7 and king to e7, the board explodes with tension. Both sides are attacking, and the situation looks extremely sharp. But here, white has a brilliant finishing tactic. Queen takes b7. This move deflects the black queen from defending the critical c5 square, paving the way for the final blow, bishop to c5, delivering a beautiful checkmate with the white bishop against the black king stranded in the center of the board. This stunning sequence perfectly captures the creative and attacking spirit of the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit, where even natural-looking moves by black can lead straight into a spectacular checkmate. This is an extremely rare and truly beautiful position, a perfect example of how creativity and calculation come together in the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit. Let's review the key moves step by step to make sure you remember the entire sequence clearly. White begins by boldly sacrificing a pawn with pawn to e4, challenging the center right from the start. Then, white immediately attacks that pawn with knight to c3. In response, black defends the e4 pawn by developing the knight to f6. Continuing in true gambit fashion, white plays pawn to f3, inviting an exchange in the center. After the pawns are traded, white recaptures with the queen, giving up yet another pawn, this time the d4 pawn, but gaining rapid development and open lines for attack. Next, white plays bishop to e3, developing with tempo and attacking the black queen. When black retreats with queen to b4, aiming at the b2 pawn, white calmly castles long, creating multiple attacking threats at once. At this moment, it may appear that black can turn the tables with bishop to g4, attacking both the white queen and the rook. But in reality, this is exactly what white was hoping for. The trap is now fully set, and white strikes decisively with knight to b5, threatening the unstoppable knight takes c7 checkmate. This elegant sequence showcases the beauty and danger of the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit, an opening where one bold sacrifice can quickly lead to a masterpiece on the chessboard. Alright, the move that is probably the best defensive attempt for black here is to protect the c7 pawn by playing knight to a6. However, even this move doesn't solve the problem. The white knight on b5 not only attacks the c7 pawn, but it also blocks the black queen's line of defense. As a result, the black queen can no longer protect the b7 pawn, leaving it completely vulnerable. White can now capture on b7, creating a whole series of deadly threats such as queen takes a8, queen takes a6, or knight takes c7, all of which leave black defenseless. For instance, if black tries to defend with rook to b8, it might look like a good idea. But even here, white has a beautiful tactical finish. Can you spot it? It's actually a simple yet elegant checkmating pattern. White plays queen takes b8, deflecting the black knight from a6, and after the knight is forced to recapture, white delivers knight takes c7, checkmate. A brilliant and instructive example of how precise coordination between the queen and knight can turn a modest-looking position into a spectacular finish in the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit.